Hi everyone, so yesterday GGG has revealed the full Ascendancy information about all 12 Ascendancies coming into early access in Path of Exile 2. I spent basically all day yesterday going through these, and there's a lot of really interesting stuff in there. Now, there are 6 classes with 2 Ascendancies each, and the way this works is that somewhere in Act 2 you have to do an Ascendancy trial, and then you choose basically your subclass. This is the permanent choice, so it is a very important one to make, and a lot of people kind of decide what to play based on what these Ascendancies do, because they can be pretty impactful, and they are usually kind of like shifting your build into a certain direction at least. Now, with that being said, there are also lots of versatile Ascendancies that can do a lot of different things at once. So especially if you're undecided for now, then you might want to play, more one or the other. Some of them are a bit more specialized, some of them are a bit more open. Here in this video, I want to go through and kind of give you the overall breakdown of what these Ascendancies can do. I'll also link this down in the description if you want to go through it by yourself and read up on all of the different nodes, but at least you're gonna get a much better idea of what these classes do. Now, I could probably make a video about every single one of them and like talk for like 2 hours, but just to kind of give you the overview, I'll keep it relatively brief here. There are certainly some that stand out a little bit more than others, just based on the numbers that we see, some of the effects that they have, and also like the general usefulness that some of them bring. Also keep in mind that we just don't really have the full picture yet of what the entire game actually has in terms of, for example, all the skills, in terms of all the items, how the scaling will work in the end game, how hard the challenges are. So there is definitely a lot of speculation in here with what I'm about to tell you. So in some cases, we also don't even know what, for example, some of the Ascendancy nodes do exactly, because they have rather incomplete information, like, for example, some of those extra skills that they're doing. So no matter how much we try to prepare, there will be, unknowns basically. And especially in the first days, I would say that we're probably going to have, a lot of shifts in, our understanding of the game. So this is something to keep in mind here. So when you're starting out and you think, hey, this looks really good, or yeah, I'm not so sure about this, well, it all might change completely later on. But overall, I think we kind of get a bit of an idea of how good some of these Ascendancies are. And I will go through every single one here and at least give you a few of the pointers that I kind of came up with at least. And to finish it off, I will also talk about the general ranking of the Ascendancies in their power levels and what I expect this to look like when the game launches. Now, let's get started. We have the Stormweaver here. This is one of the stronger Ascendancies, I would say. This is for the Sorceress. This is kind of like a cold lightning spellcaster, and it looks very good. A lot of people are very excited about doing something like Archmage, which looks like this, where you can have like a mana stacking build, and then you need a lot of mana recovery, and you get a lot of extra lightning damage for your setup. Stormweaver enables this relatively well thanks to Constant Gale. This is number 8 here. It gives you Arcane Surge, that gives you more mana regeneration rate and also more cast speed. So overall, this is actually very useful, and you can ramp this up even further with Force of Will. So especially all this Archmage mana stacking shenanigans that it can do actually has extra synergy here. And the mana recovery will be one of the biggest problems that Archmage builds will have. So this may not solve it on its own, but it will definitely get you a good part of the way there. So I think most people that will play Archmage will just do this because you can like scale your mana regen much more easily. There are other ways to do this, for example, with minions, and there's a support gem. When your minions die, you get a lot of mana. You can do mana plus stuff. So this is not the only way, I think, but it will definitely make it much more comfy. And it also has just all around lots of useful stuff here. We have number 1 that gives you extra exposure. Now, exposure in PoE 2 is a lot harder to apply than it used to be in PoE 1. But it can also just give you lots of extra damage when you can do this with one skill and then use another skill, for example, to follow up with extra damage. And then we also have this cold, freeze, and this shock cluster here in the center. So this is like number 4, 5, 6, 7, where you can have really big chills or really big shocks. And depending on the type of element that you are using with your skills, you can actually then apply all of the ailments at once very easily. And in general, ailments are really good in PoE 2. So I expect Stormweaver to kind of just have like a good all-round capability to either be a bit more safe with the chills or a bit more offensive with the shocks. So depending on what you need, you can kind of swap this around. Now, you cannot change the Ascendancy, but you can change the points inside of your Ascendancy with respecking. So you might also want to transition from like one thing to another at some point. There's also these elemental storms, but really I have no idea how good this actually is. This could also be its own thing to kind of play a Stormweaver based around these elemental storms. They're basically just like popping up like little circular AoEs, I think. But who knows how good they are. This is a bit of a question mark here. But yeah, overall, I would say with Stormweaver, if you want to do any kind of spell casting, you can't really go wrong, I would say. This seems to be something that will just kind of cover a lot of different archetypes. And it's also located on a good part of the tree. Here at the top side, this is where the sorcerer starts. So this is where a lot of the energy shield stuff is, a lot of the caster stuff is, and elemental stuff, and so on. So in general, you have a lot of options because there's a lot of different spells. So even if you choose a certain main skill and it doesn't work out very well, you can quite easily change to something else. So I expect Stormweaver to be one of the most popular classes for that reason. Now, moving on, we have the Chronomancer. Now, Chronomancer is something that I consider one of the weaker Ascendancies, maybe the weakest overall, and I think it's going to be a relatively large bait. We have seen this in some of the previews. It looks really cool. You can freeze time and you can, like, teleport back in time and whatever, but ultimately it doesn't really add all that much here for most builds. You will really need like a very specialized build that has a lot of value in resetting cooldowns, and just like basically everything in your build is a cooldown and you need to try to weave it together or something like that. I think the biggest note that we have here is probably now and again, number one, but again, you need like some skills that you can actually use, and then, sometimes they reset, sometimes they don't. Imagine, for example, you play a Chronomancer with grenades, similar to how I'm planning to do this with Mercenary. Now, grenades, there's like 5 or 6 different grenade skills. They all have cooldowns. And this is like one of those scenarios where, okay, you can just spam one of them until you can't, and then you spam the next one until you can't, and then eventually the first one comes back. Something like that. I think number one is actually really good, but all of the other stuff on here is somewhat gimmicky. So you need like a build. There's like people that talk about like the Hammer of the Gods that has like this ridiculous cooldown and ridiculous damage here. So this has 1300% attack damage, and people want to do like, for example, Ignite builds of this. But yeah, 24 seconds cooldown, So sometimes you might get lucky and they have like a crazy combo. And other times it's just gonna feel awful. So this is my expectation here. Now, with that being said, yeah, there will probably be some setups. And in general, I would expect Chronomancer to kind of like gain more power as the game matures, because it's going to be more skills. Once they introduce more classes, there's going to be more options. And eventually, I think it's just going to kind of power creep itself into viability, I guess. And for now, I would be at least cautious and would go in with like a really good plan if you try to play Chronomancer. Then we have the Titan. Titan looks extremely good. So this is one of the Warrior Ascendancies. In general, both of the Warrior Ascendancies are actually really good. I'm going to talk about Warbinger in a second. Titan just looks like the Giga Chat melee Ascendancy, basically. So it has a bunch of stun stuff. It has a bunch of like just raw power, raw life, just everything you kind of want. So we have this here, for example. One thing I like is Earthbreaker, number 2. 20% chance for slam skills to use to create aftershocks. Aftershocks basically do the same damage again. So this is right here. There's also the Ancestral Empowerment, but this is not as good. So that if you remember this from PoE 1, it doesn't seem like as OP as it was there. So you do 20% more damage and area of effect. It's not terrible to pick up. So this is right after that. But I wouldn't really like super count on that. But I think number 2 is very good, just to get those aftershocks. And then the big one here is Hulking Form. So this is probably the single strongest node of all the Ascendancies, which, well, it kind of makes sense because you pay 4 points for it and not 2. Because the one before that is number 4, which is basically nothing. So you get 20 inventory slots. This is like a thing that I had in like the Wildwood League, where you just have a large inventory. And this Ascendancy actually brings that back to PoE 2, which is kind of funny. Now, technically, having a bigger inventory is some form of like an efficiency boost, I guess. So keep that in mind. It's not actually just lost points, but of course it doesn't make the game easier by itself. But the big one is Hulking Form. 50% increased effect of small passive skills. Sounds extremely nutty. Now, we don't have the full passive tree information if you look at this here. but you kind of get a bit of an idea of, you know, what to expect. So here are some notes: 10% increased energy shield, that will become 15%. Or you have 10% projectile damage, that will become 15%. And then you have 10% melee damage, and so on. So you're gonna have a lot of these points. I would expect there's probably gonna be like 50 or so small passive points on like an endgame build. So eventually you're gonna have the equivalent of 75 small passive points. So imagine you get 25 extra, you know, 10% melee damage points or something like that, you know, just to kind of understand the value a little bit. So this seems extremely nuts, and I expect this is probably gonna get nerfed actually. But for now, this looks really good, and this is one of the reasons why Titan is so strong, I think. And there's also just like other really good stuff. You can do like this stun stuff here with the crushing blows. So if you want to do like a, you know, really kind of slow, hard-hitting guy, then you can do that. You have the 50% more life. Life basically just does not exist anywhere besides on your items. So this is just really nice. You're going to be like just a melee Giga Chad. Really powerful Ascendancy in my book. Now, then we have the Warbinger. Also very good. I also expect this to be one of the best. Main reason for that is actually number 8 and number 9, which is the Warcry stuff. So you can explode corpses with Warcry, which like all these explosions are usually very nice. Number 1, this makes you much safer because Detonate Dead is then basically not possible anymore. And also like they deal damage of their life pool as damage around them. So this stuff is always really good for AoE clear. And you have number 9 with the Ignore Warcry cooldowns. Especially Infernal Cry is a very nice Warcry. And it allows you to like do a lot of AoE damage. Basically you apply a debuff to enemies, you kill them, and then they start chain reacting and explode. So first you get the explosions when they die, and then you get the explosions again after they died. So you just kind of go like Giga single target, you know, Warcry, and you just whack something down, and then you start crying basically. Like it's gonna be pretty nutty, I think. And also 1 and 2 are really good. This is here on the left. Okay, 2 is kind of hard to say how good it will be, but I think 1 is going to be very nice at least, where you break armor based on the damage done. So especially the later you go into the game, the more damage you will deal. Your damage will ramp up more than, for example, stuff like armor values, I imagine. So you will eventually just have a kind of fully broken armor on the target if you want. And there's also the way, like a way to get like below 0 armor. Now, no one has any idea what this does, I think, but it sounds like it could be very good at least. And if not, there is also like other stuff you can take here. So, you know, there's also, for example, the defensive side with the totem, where you can have the totem take damage from you. There's, you know, other like, you know, the shield stuff here as well. In general, this looks like just a really good and versatile Ascendancy, and it has this Jade stuff where you can like absorb damage if you want. So if you are kind of like a more slow-paced player or something, and you want to just like kind of face tank the big abilities, you just press this button. So yeah, overall, I think Warbringer is going to be really, really good. Then we have Deadeye, another really strong Ascendancy. I don't think it's going to be very popular in general. Ranger seems to be far down in the popularity rankings, but I think this is a good one. The main reason for that is endless munitions. So skills, fire, and additional projectile. This is a very strong node. You have to see that in PoE 2, projectiles just do not really exist. There's very few like instances that we have seen where you get extra projectiles, and they're usually very little and very costly. So in that case, just having an extra projectile for skills that can actually shotgun is really like a lot of value. This is actually one of the stronger nodes across all Ascendancies, I think. For this, you have to go through point blank or far shot, which also seems fine, but I don't really know exactly like the meters, like how much of a distance that is. But basically, either have like the short range stuff or you have the long range stuff, and you have to kind of decide on which works for you. But yeah. +1 projectile, this is versatile, this goes for anything, and it also seems like point blank and far shot now works for anything as well. So it says projectiles deal more hit damage. In the past it used to be only for attacks, I think, and I think the same with far shot, and now you can actually kind of do this on anything, including spells. So you can also find some spells maybe to use with Ranger, and then use, you know, for example, the extra projectile. And it has Tailwind. Tailwind is also very premium because there is just basically almost no movement speed or action speed in the game. And you can kind of ramp this up, but it's like much harder to use than it used to be. You have to not get hit in order to not lose the buff. This used to be like exactly reversed. The lose of Tailwind was on like the Wind Ward here in PoE 1. But overall, if you are a good player and you dodge well and you have lots of evasion and stuff, then you can actually use a Tailwind relatively well. You get faster and you know, just more evasion rating, have less damage taken. So even if you do take a hit, then you actually survive it. So overall, I expect Deadeye to be very good if you know what you're doing. And it also has some other little, you know, interesting stuff like the apply additional mark could be interesting. You have the frenzy charges. So overall, I expect this to be very good actually. Then we have Pathfinder. So Pathfinder is kind of an interesting one. It does have like 2 nodes that are like single-handedly enabling poison builds potentially, which is like 3 and 4. So you spread the poisons and you double the number of poisons with the downside here. So if you want to play a build that is like largely based on poison, that might be the Ascendancy for it. Now that being said, it seems extremely difficult to make builds that are exactly based on like just one element. So like a pure ignite build, a pure bleed build, and so on. At least I don't see that happening. Poison could work because of this, but remains to be seen. It also has kind of like its own builds here with the concoctions, so that's kind of interesting. So you can make like a poison concoction there, or you can throw it on the others. Maybe they can be used as a support tool as well. So there's some interesting stuff here for the Pathfinder, but really hard to say how good that is. But for example, just kind of, you know, inflicting the cold exposure or fire exposure or something could be like a nice utility tool, for example, on some builds. So we'll see about that. It also has the flask charges here. Now, Pathfinder used to be very popular for its flask charges that it gained, which now does not exist anymore, the automatic flask charges at least. But you still get more flask charges, and they also have this life flask effects are cute. This may not seem that good at first, but it actually is very strong, I think. Life recovery in general is going to be much harder to gain, and much more like, let's say, a conscious choice with your life flask, for example. Getting more life flask charges, and you can kind of queue it so that it's just kind of permanently running, is actually really good. Personally, I very often use life flasks in PoE 1 as well, because it is actually a pretty big survivability boost, being able to press this and just getting tons of life over time. And I expect the same here. We probably get to the point where you can actually generate enough automatic flask charges, for example, to even sustain your life flasks in like long boss fights. And then you can probably expect, you know, multiple hundreds of life per second or something in the late game that you just kind of have permanently running from those nodes. And I would not underestimate the value of that. Then there's also like some other nodes down here, 5 passive points from Traveler's Wisdom. That's kind of like not terrible, I'd say. You just get like more options to choose on your stuff. And then you also have Running Assault and Relentless Pursuit. Now, Running Assault, I think, is relatively good, especially for like archers and like any kind of like spell casting while moving and so on. This is very good, I think. It's going to generally speed you up. Number 8, with the unaffected by slows, I don't really expect much of this. I'm not sure why this is here. This seems random weak, but there might be at least certain maps, certain monster types, certain bosses where this could come in very handy. But for now, I wouldn't really put this on my build by default, at least. Then you have the Bloodmage. That's an interesting one. A lot of people seem very excited for this. I am a bit hesitant to call this very strong, but I guess we'll see. One big thing that it has is blood barbs, actually. So number 4, you can now apply bleeds with your elemental spells. So for example, you can do like a big flame blast and apply a bleed and an ignite together, and then just kind of like, you know, dot down the boss or something like that. So this is really where most of the strength lies here on this. There is also like 7 and 8. There is also number 7 here that makes you very tanky. Grasping Wounds, 25% of life loss from hits is prevented, and that much life is lost over 4 seconds instead. Very powerful defensive node. And we also have 5 and 6 that a lot of people are hyped about with the crit scaling. Now we have to see that PoE 2 crit builds are going to be much more difficult to set up than PoE 1 crit builds. I don't expect we're going to get anywhere close to like permanent 100% crit chance all the time with all of your abilities or anything like that. I think this is not happening, and I would be kind of cautious going into Bloodmage thinking about I'm going to make like a pure crit build. At the very least, I would wait and see like how this will play out. There are other options to choose, as I mentioned, but yeah, if you go in there and you think I'm going to make a 100% crit build, I don't think so. So I guess we'll see how the items will work, but there are a lot of like nerfs to crit chance, especially in PoE 2. And even with like a base crit of 15%, I don't expect to get anywhere close to 100. In general though, Bloodmage is very cool and versatile, so it definitely has a cool theme. It also has, for example, the spell leech, which is pretty nutty to keep you alive later on. So if you can not solve your like life costs in another way, Then you can go for this here. This is going to make you very tanky as well. There's the infinite curses, so especially if you have like multiple curses. Apparently there's also some stuff with minions you can do here, which sounds kind of fun. So overall, Bloodmage I think is a very good ascendancy, but you kind of need to build it right and don't get baited too much by potentially not working crit nodes, let's say, or like, you know, not very powerful stuff here with the crits. So this is a kind of my input on this. Then we have the Infernalist. Oh boy, this is a pretty interesting one. I was actually planning to maybe make an Infernalist list, but now I'm not so sure. It does have one really good thing going for it, which is number 10. This is the Loyal Hellhound that takes 20% of your damage, which is very good. But unfortunately, this is about the only thing that just kind of works. And everything else here, you have to, you know, really think about how you're going to play this, what you're going to do in order to actually get value out of this Ascendancy. So we have one thing, which is the Demon Form, which currently seems to replace your weapon, and you kind of lose all the stats from your weapon when you transform. So this is kind of decent early on, and then the better your gear gets, the worse it becomes, which is kind of sad. They might change that, but I think for the start this is not how that is. But yeah, Demon Form gives you like extra cast speed and then damage and extra skill ranks. So it overall is a very powerful boost, but I think later will just be outclassed. Then you have the Pyromantic Pact, which is interesting, where you can just ignore mana regen basically, and you instead have this Pyromantic Pact, so you cast everything for free, but then you take damage after some time, after filling up your Infernal Flame. And this is very interesting because just not investing into mana is actually relatively decent, but you have to first get a lot of life recovery and a lot of fire res in order to not just kill yourself with the Pyromantic Pact. So this is something to keep in mind. There's also 8 and 9, which are interesting, but on the other hand, seem very tough to actually set up. So I need to have certain skills where you can like really fine-tune your, you know, Infernal Flame generation basically, and you want to stay at certain ranges of Infernal Flame. So it sounds very gimmicky and kind of tough when you want to do like certain combo skills, and yeah, I don't really see this being like really comfy to play at the very least. But maybe this could be very good. And especially as like a, for example, like a party player, this could be very nice with Seething Body here with the extra 20% damage as fire damage for everyone and stuff like that. But yeah, kind of tough. And then we have like number 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is damage conversion. Potentially a downside here with the physical damage taken as chaos. So especially when you have some energy shield, you actually take more damage when you take chaos damage, because chaos does double to energy shield. And it might also be kind of tough to, for example, get chaos res and so on. But I guess it depends on like how easy is it to get armor, how easy is it to get chaos res, how much energy shield are you building. But you will have to build energy shield if you go down this path here, because you reserve your life. So this seems to be like the only way to reserve life that I have seen in the game so far. And you get relatively powerful effects here. Like for example, extra maximum spirit, extra mana, extra maximum energy shield. So you do get quite some value out of this, especially later on when you actually have a lot of extra life. The reserved life will not take away from your maximum life, that is separate. So you still get like the full value, no matter if you take like only 1 or 2 or 3 of those nodes here that reserve your life. But it is like a very special way of actually building a character, and you have to be very prepared for this. You need to, you know, have gear ready for this and so on. So yeah, overall it seems kind of tough to make Infernalist work, but it is a very cool and interesting ascendancy. Then we have the Witchhunter. So this is most likely what I'll be starting. It seems like kind of like middle of the pack, I'd say, in terms of power level. But that was one of the like earlier previews that we have seen. And it's just like a decent all-rounder that can actually also kind of pivot into many different directions. So the best part of this, I think, is probably number 8, which is Zealous Inquisition. This has explosions, 10% chance to kill an enemy, deal all of the life as damage. These explosions are very large, so especially as the game kind of ramps up and the density ramps up in like late game, I imagine, we're probably going to get a lot of value out of this. So AoE damage is relatively covered, but keep in mind it's only a 10% chance or 20 against undead and demons. So it is not that consistent. You can't fully rely on this for your AoE clear, but I think this is going to help you out with clear speed quite a lot. And then the rest is just kind of like, it kind of depends what you're trying to go for and, you know, what you can make out of it. I think Cutting Strike and Decimating Strike is all right, not really powerful, but basically you get like a big chunk of damage at the start of the fight, and then you finish off the targets earlier at the end of the fight. So you kind of like shortcut fights a little bit. So if you don't really have anything else to take here, they kind of just work, but they're not like the craziest nodes out there. So, but yeah, they're kind of like probably both in a range of something like 5 to 10% or 5 to 15% more damage or so, which is all right, I guess. Then we have number 1. That is interesting, Weapon Master. So if you have a setup where you can actually choose between like very different layouts on your passive tree, then I think Weapon Master is going to be a very powerful one. Choosing 20 more passive points to assign to either one of your 2 weapon sets is extremely good. This means like you're gonna get like 4, maybe 5 more notables, and some of these notables can actually be like, you know, maybe 5%, 10% DPS each, for example, plus small nodes. So you can actually have like a really large shift in your power from one weapon to the other. So like, for example, you play a mercenary with a crossbow, and you have like 1 crossbow for your grenade stuff, and you have 1 crossbow for, you know, all of your ammunition and your shots, for example. Or you do like a crossbow and a bow, and then you actually have like another ability where you have like a lot of bow nodes. So there's a lot of possible combinations here. And I think that alone is actually really worth a lot. So if you plan to make like 2 very distinct setups with 2 different weapon sets in the same build, then Weapon Master is extreme value, I think. And we have the concentration stuff here and the sorcery reward. They seem all right. Concentration is kind of nice because it just makes the game easier. So you just give monsters like a less cooldown recovery rate, which means they use their abilities less often, but it's hard to say how good is that really. So I imagine in some boss fights it's going to be really nuts. You also get a bit of an extra damage buff here, but it needs to ramp up first and you have to make sure that it doesn't drop. So yeah, it can also just sometimes be a bit awkward. And the sorcery reward seems to be just like something worth picking up. If you stack armor and evasion anyway, you get a bunch of extra elemental damage like reduction, which is very nice. Then we have the Gemling Legionnaire. Now that is interesting. It is also like a very versatile one. I would say if you don't know what you're playing, then you play this, because it's kind of like the most all-rounder of all the Ascendancies. This is also a mercenary one. It just kind of gives you buffs to all of your skills, basically. So that's what it does. It doesn't do anything like kind of like special on its own, besides allowing you to press many more buttons. But it's just kind of like more raw power kind of in the form of extra gems. Now we have the quality. This was already nerfed. This used to be 12, now it's 10. Now the thing is, we don't really know what quality does for most of the gems, but it can be pretty impactful on some of them. So it seems like it's kind of like hit and miss depending on what gem you have. Some of them are pretty impactful, but this could actually be a relatively good boost relatively early on. So keep an eye on this when you start the game. If you want to play a Gemling, then number 1 might be actually a really good pickup right away. You also have +1 level to all skills there, which could be alright. I have no idea how much they really scale per level. We have number 3, less cost of skills. That seems relatively weak, especially because it raises your attribute requirements and doesn't lower them. So yeah, unless you have really big trouble with your mana, yeah, I think you can solve this other ways, to be honest. I don't think this is very good. Then we have the 3 extra skill slots for integrated efficiency. That is pretty solid, especially if you're planning to, for example, use 2 different setups together or something like that with like 2 different weapons. What I just explained with Witchhunter, you can also do this more easily here. In general, there's, for example, minion builds that usually require many buttons, and you can like include maybe like a totem and some extra curse and some extra trigger, and you can do a lot of different things when you have more skill slots, even with automated skill slots. So I think this is relatively good here. And then comes number 5, which is probably the biggest node on this entire thing, which allows you to use 2 of the same support gems. So usually they are unique and you can only use 1 of each on your character. But in this case, you can have 2. And this means you can actually scale all of your skills a lot better, because suddenly you have so many more options on support gems. And I think this is really the main reason why someone would choose the Gemling Legionnaire here. And you have like some other nice little stuff here. There's like more res. I don't expect this to be like super crazy, but especially if you can somehow specialize into one of those resistances, and you really want like a certain type of resistance for certain reasons, like a unique item or something, this could be very good. And then we have like the attribute requirements and the attribute stacking stuff here on 7 and 8. This could also be relatively good, especially like a strength stacking scenario where you get a lot of life from the strength stacking. If you can somehow also get, let's say, extra power from that in terms of damage, yeah, there could be some stuff here, but I think we don't have enough info for it just yet. Then we have the Invoker. This is a Monk Ascendancy and it's actually really good. So the main reason why I think this one is good is not because of these damage nodes here in the middle, but because of 1 and 2. So you get more spirit and you also gain lots of physical damage reduction. Now, more spirit, we don't know how far this will go, but I could imagine you get somewhere in the range of like 50 to 100 extra spirit later on. So this means more auras, more trigger gems, more, you know, this kind of stuff. Very good, I think. And then we have number 2 with physical damage reduction. Now in PoE 1, there was a stat called additional physical damage reduction. And basically what it does is that it disproportionately rewards you for stacking it because of how the armor formula works. I expect the same, where if you have some flat percent physical reduction, it will actually make you suddenly a lot safer, because armor does not mitigate very large hits very well. But when you have physical damage reduction, it will basically lower that large hit to a lower number, and then the rest will go into the armor calculation, which is then also reduced even more than it would otherwise be. So it's a bit complicated, but TLDR is physical damage reduction was extremely powerful. And if you can actually ramp this up by stacking evasion, okay, you get a penalty of having less evasion rating, but I do expect this to be a very good defensive node. So I think that first you get the spirit for, like, you know, more, you know, trigger stuff, which makes the build more comfy. And there's also other trigger synergies here on number 7, for example, meta skills, which is all of this cast while channeling, cast on crit, and so on. These are the meta skills. They gain more energy, so you can actually make this combo work even better. And then you also have the confidence of the extra damage reduction. I think overall this is going to be a very nice ascendancy to play, especially for newcomers to the game. And then there's a bunch of other stuff. There's like the meditate. Could be nice if you want to use that. Then there's like the chill stuff and the unbound avatar. That could be very good as well. Depends on like how much they have nerfed unbound avatar from PoE 1 that existed on a radar in PoE 1, which gave you 80% more elemental damage and then let all of your damage like chill and shock and ignite and stuff like that when you activate it. So this could be very good as well to apply all of the elements at once, do a lot more damage at once. But yeah, it kind of comes down to like what exactly you want to do here. And then we have 8 and 9. Crits ignore the monster and the mental res. I don't expect that to be very good, but maybe if you have like a build where they crit all the time and stuff. But yeah, kind of whatever, I think. And then it's the elemental expression. We also don't really know what this does. It does like some explosions and bolts that you kind of trigger, but who knows how good those are. But yeah, they could be very good. And I think that 1 and 2 and also like the unbound avatar here are going to be very good choices on the monk. And lastly, we have the Chayula monk. Now that is an interesting one as well. I expect this to be probably the overall highest DPS ascendancy out there. The main reason for that is number 5 and 6. And there's also number 4 that gives you like raw damage basically. A lot of people were excited for like the darkness stuff here, but I would say this darkness stuff looks really bad to me, honestly. I mean, it will help you to avoid one-shots and stuff like that. But first of all, you remove all spirit, which means you have no auras, no trigger gems. It's just like a huge power loss. And I don't think I'm going to ever go down the path with number 7, 8, 9 here. Even if you somehow get good and you never take any damage, and you always have like Grasp of the Void, for example, it's not even that crazy for 4 points. So I would ignore this path. But yeah, 5, 6 is actually nuts. So Into the Breach gives you these Flames of Chayula. They actually previewed this at some point. And you can pick them up. You get life, you get mana, and you get a stacking damage buff that gives you 240% of your damage as extra chaos damage if you ramp this up. And it seems relatively consistent to do this. So we'll have to wait and see what this will be like exactly, and you know how comfy this will be. I expect a lot of people will not like playing like this. So this is kind of like a playstyle choice here for this monk, and not so much like, you know, what you get out of it in terms of like special stuff, because you have to run around and pick up the flames. So you might actually want to play like a ranged monk, for example. And the monk is like very well positioned on the tree. It's like here on the top right, where you can like, you know, go up here to the spell stuff, or you can go down here to like the bow and the crossbow stuff, for example. So you actually have the option to kind of play all of the main archetypes here, besides maybe like minions or so, but maybe even that. But I'm not sure if, like, for example, these damage buffs would apply to minions. I don't think so, actually. But either way, you have a lot of different options, and it's just like lots of raw power here that comes with 4, 5, and 6, and lots of chaos damage here. So you can maybe even like have like a curse or like some kind of like chaos resistance reduction and so on, and that's really nice. And lastly, you have 1 and 2, so you can also build, for example, like an energy shield character and an instant leech energy shield. You don't have to rely on the recharge, for example, and that is also really valuable. So yeah, overall, I expect this Shayula Monk to be actually one of the strongest, if not the strongest, like overall DPS output at least. It does have relatively good defenses. You get lots of healing and mana, and honestly, I expect nerfs for this. So this is what I think here right now. But yeah, we just went through all of the Ascendancies. I kept it kind of brief for all of them. So keep in mind, you know, there are lots of crazy combos possible. And, you know, for example, what I mentioned with like the Chronomancer, you can do like probably really good stuff, even if I think the Ascendancy is overall just not that strong. I might have overlooked some things that I just didn't really think about now. Or, you know, there's like maybe some really obscure combos that you're gonna find. So overall, take all of this with a grain of salt. This is pre-early access and the game is vast. There's so many different combos, so it's really hard to give like the overall picture. But I try to keep it, you know, concise and give like the main points about why I think certain Ascendancies are good or bad. And lastly, we also have the tier list at the end. So this is what this looks like here. So someone linked this to me yesterday and I was like, okay, I can put this together. And basically what I'm trying to rank here is, you know, how many people that choose a certain Ascendancy will likely be successful with that Ascendancy, basically no matter what kind of like build they're trying to make. So of course, certain Ascendancies have like a much, you know, clearer picture of what they do. Like, for example, the Titan with like the slams, or, you know, the Ranger with like, you know, ranged abilities and so on. But you can also do really wacky stuff like a spellcasting warrior or, you know, a spellcasting ranger and so on. So we'll have to wait and see what will actually happen and what kind of builds people make. I'm not ranking specific builds, I'm just ranking what I think the Ascendancies can do overall. So I think one of the best one is the Shayula Monk. I just talked about it here. Lots of damage. Stormweaver, I think, is a really good choice. You can do many different spell builds, caster builds with that, and Archmage stuff and so on. I expect that to just work out really well. And I also expect both of the warrior ascendancies to be extremely strong based on what we've seen here with, like, you know, either the passive buffs or the armor breaking and the war cries. So there's lots of really good stuff here. I think that warriors is going to be giga chats basically going into this game, and you're just going to be pumping. Then we have the monk. This is the Invoker here, so I don't think that Invoker will like have crazy damage output, but it's a very comfy ascendancy, and, you know, has all the automation and the damage reduction, and it's just gonna allow you to like much more aggressively like invest into damage in other ways. I think that's gonna be very good. We have the Deadeye here, mostly the +1 projectile. I think is going to be very powerful on this thing. So I have this ranked relatively high, but it also has the speed, it has a bunch of other utility here. Then on B, I put both the mercenaries, so the Witchhunter and the Gemling Legionnaire. I think they're going to be relatively decent, but nothing crazy. So yeah, like as I said, I'll probably start mercenary myself. I think it's going to be fine, but yeah, we'll see how this will play out against others. And the same with the Gemling. Like, Gemling is kind of like a really decent all-rounder, I think, but it doesn't really bring a lot of really special stuff to the table. So there might be certain builds that really profit from like the extra skill slots or the extra gem quality and these kind of things, but overall, yeah, kind of like nothing crazy. Infernalist, I think has potential to be really crazy as well, but that will really depend on like how well we can use, for example, all this low life stuff or these and Infernal Flame stuff. But I think it's not looking that good, and it's also very hard to build. So I would be kind of cautious playing an Infernalist here. We have the Pathfinder. I think it's also solid all-rounder. Has like the poison stuff, so there is actually potential for some poison builds to be like super good with this. And maybe I would actually rank this higher if you want to go for that. The concoctions we haven't seen that could also be very powerful. So there is some potential here. Bloodmage, I have it relatively far down. And this is mostly because I think it's going to be very tough to actually build a really strong functioning Bloodmage. So I would be kind of cautious going into this. You also have a very weak start with Bloodmage when you look at what you actually get here at the start. So you just get almost a downside, to be honest, as your first Ascendancy node. And then, you know, that's kind of like ramping. You know, you can't just go down the crit path and expect to be suddenly much more powerful. You know, it's kind of like you have to build for it, and I think it will take a while to get there. But in the late game, I actually expect them to kind of like pop off. This is probably like more of like a late game ascendancy here, I would say. But for now, I would be kind of careful with the Bloodmage. And then we have the Chronomancer as the lowest here because, yeah, it's kind of similar story. You need like the right setup, you need like many different cooldown skills. And even then, it doesn't really seem to be that crazy. So Chronomancer I would have ranked as the lowest right now. Again, this is just kind of like some overall ranking, hard to really give the full picture with, you know, all of the builds available. There's so many different combos, like every one of these can play, you know, 100 different builds. So it's just kind of like the idea basically behind it that I think kind of like this picture shows. But yeah, this is it for my Ascendancy breakdown. Let me know what you think. Maybe there's stuff that I just missed now that I didn't talk about enough, or that you think will somehow pop off really hard, but I didn't think so. Let me know in the comments what do you think about explanations and my picture of each of these Ascendancies here. Maybe I'll also go through them and shift my starter to something else. We'll see, because I'm still very undecided. There's so much cool stuff. And I do have to say that all of these Ascendancies look exciting to play. So even if they don't look necessarily all of them on the same power level, I think they are all exciting. They all bring something to the table. And I definitely want to play any of them, to be honest. Even the Chronomancers, even, the Blood Mages and so on. There's so much cool stuff, and I think GG has really outdone themselves with those Ascendancies. So that's what I got here for now. Stay tuned for some more guides and uploads as the game goes into early access. I'm gonna blast a lot. I also have already a few other guides that you might want to check out if you want to be better prepared. But here we go. So I'm very excited for Friday. It's gonna be very fun. And let's see how accurate my predictions were here. So hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you guys next time.